Well, good morning, everybody. Of course, here in the United States this morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Andrew Mason's special talk here on behavioral iridology. We're so excited to have you here. And I've had the pleasure of listening to Andrew speak twice now. Once at the International Iridology Practitioners Association Symposium in February, where Andrew gave an amazing talk about behavioral iridology, and then also again at the Guild of the Naturopathic Iridologists. So, I contacted him and thought it would be really wonderful to be able to share that information with everybody so that you can learn about behavioral iridology. A lot of us know about the physical side of things, but it's really great to learn the behavior and the emotion and all that goes with it. And with working with clients, we know that it's so important not only to work on the physical side, but also to learn about, our clients and their personality and their emotions and, what makes them tick, so to speak. So for those of you that don't know me, I am a certified comprehensive iridologist through IPA, the International Iridology Practitioners Association. I do teach levels 1, 2, and 3, and Joyful Living Services is a sanctioned school through IPA. So we are now currently working on a kind of a cooperative agreement with the Guild, and so hopefully we'll be announcing some of that soon. So let me give you a little bit of information here about Andrew. He is an expert in behavioral iridology. He started studying holistic medicine 20 years ago, completing his training in Ayurvedic medicine in 2006. He then undertook a unique and extensive apprenticeship in the East, learning the closely guarded processes involved in the manufacture of Ayurvedic alchemical remedies. And he has a book here, his latest book, Iridology: How Our Body, Personality, and True Nature is Revealed Through the Eyes, where he fuses the practice of physical iridology with that of the behavioral model. And this book will be an essential guide for those interested in the practical application of both schools of iridology. So today, Andrew's going to introduce all of us to the fundamentals of behavioral model, its constitutional base, its effects, and its modifiers. So welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day to talk to all of us and teach us a little bit about behavioral iridology. Really appreciate you.
Okay, shall I just do a very short, I'll just discuss what we'll do quickly, and then after that we'll do the swap over, yeah, so I can show the slides.
Okay.
So thank you everyone for coming, great turnout. It's a rather big topic, so I can't possibly hope to cover all of it in the time we've got. I was thinking we'll probably talk for maybe 50 minutes, something like that. And in that time, I'll try and go over all the basics. We'll just give you a flavor so you get a rough idea about what the system is, how we use it, those kind of things. It is a big topic, and there are lots of layers to it, and it can be used in many different ways. And just listening to Brenda there, it kind of reminded me of something in why I would think the behavioral model is important. In Ayurveda, we say that there's a tripod that you need. You need 3 things to come together to have a successful outcome in any kind of treatment. So you basically need a good doctor, you need a good remedy, but most importantly, you need a good patient. So if any one of those 3 fails, the tripod collapses. And the most important is the patient. So for somebody that's offering anything to do with healing, obviously understanding what the person in front of you is really coming for or wants to say would be highly useful. And this is where this system can really be useful in identifying. You can just get a kind of sense of where the person is, how they're going to respond to treatment, based on the kind of the quality and the structure of the iris, and also how they're going to be hearing you, how they're going to be taking your information in. Are they going to just be like staring at you blankly and sort of just listening, or are they going to be following your every word? And you can, from that kind of overview, you can try and base your treatment based on what would be best for them. Well, it just gives you an inroad. Think of it as another tool in your toolbox, just to give you a little bit more precision in what you're doing. So let me start by sharing. So shall we swap over so I can show the slides? I'm now host. Look at that, amazing. So if I do, hang on, if I do share screen, there it is. You think I'd know how to do this by now, wouldn't you? Can you see that? Yeah, all good, good. Okay, so let's start right from the beginning. I'm assuming everyone here is, obviously their background is iridology and they understand the various constitutions and the model of what I call the physical model. So when we look at the physical model, and we're not going to be discussing that obviously, but when we look at it, you've got this top hierarchical of the tree, and you've got the primary constitution. So you're looking at basically a blue eye, a mixed, or a brown. And that's the kind of underlying tone to the whole work, isn't it? That's when somebody walks in, the first thing we're doing is we're looking at the color of the eye. So that you can see that the way that model is looked at is based on the iris color. Whereas when we look at the behavioral system, color actually isn't that important for us. It's what we call a modifier. It makes a difference, but it's not going to be a primary mode of determining what sort of person we've got in front of us. So in the behavioral model, what we're going to be looking at mainly is structure. So if I just move to this slide here. So there are three types of structure that we're looking for when we look into the iris. The first thing is the regularity of the fiber, which is really important because that's telling us a lot, how the fiber moves from the pupil towards the edge of the eye. And in the behavioral system, what we're sort of looking at is a dynamic pulsing sort of life force that's coming out of the pupil. You know, the pupil is never static. It's always moving. It's always adjusting. And that's not just a light-based thing. That can be based on how the person's feeling, or, you know, at any given moment, there's that sort of pulsation. And that's this life force that's sort of pulsing out into the eye. And as it moves outwards, it moves down the fibers and away to the periphery. And the iris is actually like the person themselves, whereas the white or the sclera is like the environment around them. So we've got this kind of disc that's floating in this sea of white with all these fibers that are moving out from the center towards the edge. So how the energy moves across the eye is a big thing. So if it's kind of very straight and regular, that's how the life force just moves across the iris. It's a very straight linear motion. It comes out of the pupil and then towards the periphery and then discharges. But if you've got lots of wavy fiber in there, or we've got lots of openings, then the passage of energy is kind of convoluted. It's no longer moving from the sort of center outwards. It's kind of moving around, and it creates these sort of pockets or openings in the eye, which we obviously determine are the lacuna. Then the other piece of structure that's very important for us is this acquired pigment. So I use the rather antiquated term soric spots, and I get a slap wrist for saying that, but I know obviously now it's moved on to being pigment patches or freckles or whatever you want to call them, but I'm just going to call them Sora. When you hear me say Sora, you just imagine whatever your favorite word is. So these acquired pigment patches are kind of focal points of energy. So again, as life force radiates across the surface of the pupil, when it strikes these pigmented patches, it kind of focuses it in and charges it up, because pigment's a natural store of energy. So what happens is it sort of takes some of that life force and holds it within those pigment patches, and it becomes energized. So it becomes a focal point. So now when you look at these three types of structure that we're looking at, you begin to sort of get a sense of, or a flavor of what each one's offering. So the regularity of fiber is like the base, is like what's giving stability to the whole structure. So the more regular, the more even, the more the energy is going to flow in a nice linear fashion. You've got the openings, which are kind of diversifying, and they're leaving gaps, like there's spaces or something missing. And then finally, you've got these pockets of color, which are kind of gobbling up the life force, if you like, and becoming supercharged and becoming focal. And it's a combination of all these that it gives us a mean to determine a constitutional model in the behavioral system. And that's what we're looking at. So whereas the physical, you're saying, you know, like the blue, brown, and mixed, we're looking at two types. Everybody's going to fall into one of two categories. They're either going to be an emotional feeling type of person, or they're going to be a thinking analytical type of person. Now you kind of think, oh, well, that doesn't really tell me that much about the person, but there are many things associated with those polarities, and they send us off in sort of completely different directions. And there's many things that are associated with them as well. So it becomes a good basic or general diagnostic tool. Just as when the person walks into the room and you're thinking, is it blue, mixed or brown? What we're doing when they come into the room is thinking, is this some kind of emotional or is it some kind of thinking type? So that's what we're looking to determine. So just hold in that space at the moment, the regularity of fiber. We will come back to that and you'll see how it'll fit into it. But just for now, concentrate on this opening fibers. Think Lacuna, think Sora, okay? So those, in essence, are what are allowing us to determine which constitutional type we're dealing with. Are we dealing with an emotional feeling type, openings and spaces, or are we dealing with a thinking analytical type, focused, contracted, and pinpointed? And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense as well, because, you know, the emotional type is all about that sort of missing space in their life. They have this kind of something's like not there. They have a void that needs to be filled, and it's filled with a kind of an emotional charge that is contained within this lacuna. So the more lacuna you have, and the more the energy of the emotions are contained in it, the more it kind of pushes out that energy around in the lacuna, and the more emotional charge they build up. And this type, the thinking analytical type, it's kind of the opposite. It's like an imploding quality. The more of these colored spots they get in the eye, the more it's focusing, the more they're kind of analyzing, the more it's getting to detail. It's kind of going the opposite way. It's getting more and more focus or charge like that. Now, because they are opposites, like any opposites, there is a force that moves them away, but there's a force of attraction as well. So these two are very much kind of repelled but attracted at the same time. And you'll see how that works when we move through the various slides. So I kind of put this one in here because it's quite funny, actually. It just always makes me think the operating system is the iris. You know, is our iris a kind of pre-installed operating system? When we look in somebody's eyes, is it all mapped out before us? Have we no choice in the matter? It's, you know, when we arrive, how are the dice? You know, how's the dice loaded against us? Is everything set before we arrive? And looking at the structure of the iris, you can see from sort of looking at like embryos that are still forming, you know, when you're studying, you can see that already lacuna are starting to form in the eye at quite an early period during the gestation period. So, you know, something like 5th to 6 months, we're already starting to see, you know, the eyes well formed, and you're beginning to see the fibers, and all these patterns are going to a sort of, it's almost like they're filling into a predetermined shape or pattern. And quite interestingly, you'll see in your own family, if you look between family members, you'll see that there are similarities where things can be, you know, certain quarters of the eye will be more active than others, or there may be recurrent shapes that move through the family. The interesting thing is that the pigment patches, the storic spots, tend to come much later. I mean, it's very unusual for them to be there at birth. In fact, I don't think they are at all. I don't think there's any photographic evidence for that. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Generally, they tend to form around 2 to 3 years. You'll start seeing the first 1 or 2 pop up. I see more of an explosion of these around 12 to 14, something like that. I've seen them form as late as 50. I've actually seen, you know, I remember one guy I knew, I didn't see him for 1 year, and he came back, you know, a big dark brown Sora just formed. So they can come pretty late, and it's not really understood how they form, the real mechanism, where there's a couple of competing theories about how they form. I mean, we won't get into that here, but just needless to say that it's a later adaptation. So we seem to have 2 kinds of patterns in the iris here. We've got these lacuna that are almost predetermined, that are coming before you're even taking your first breath, independent of your mother. You know, those are already set, so to speak. And yet these soric spots come much later and are acting like sort of modifiers or pattern changes. And I've noticed, for instance, you'll find sometimes if somebody's got quite a prominent Sora in their eye, the next generation, their child, may have a lacuna in that same place. So Sora we tend to associate more with like now, future, whereas we look at lacuna as being more past, transgenerational, you know, moving through the family patterns. Anyway, I just put that in there for a little bit of fun. Okay, so I think what we'll do is, okay, well, let's just look at this very, very quickly. I mean, it's an important piece of what we need to understand. There are what we call the effects that are actually piled on top of the constitution. So we have a driver effect and we have an empathic effect. It's probably better to show you these on actual real life or real world pictures of irises, and we'll explain as we go along. But just keep in your mind, remember what I said to come back to this empathic fiber. Empathic fiber, these very straight, regular, compact fibers, this is going to produce what we call the empathic effect. And then when we get a combination of Sora and Lacuna together, it creates a driver effect. The idea here is that the very closeness and richness of type fibers together are very sort of grounding and settling. Whereas when you put the two opposite dynamics of the Lacuna and the Sora together, you get this explosive charge that moves things apart. So it's just to alert you to that. But we'll get, when we get to that, you'll see more. So this is a graphic that I put together to kind of show the whole system. I mean, don't get put off by it. It may look a little bit complicated, but it's not actually that.
Ready to go outside and sit in the sunshine.
We got a bit of noise there. Yeah. No. Okay. Okay. So when we look at this, it's a series of concentric circles, and we're moving obviously from the outside towards the center. And the idea is it's a bit like layers of an onion. As we move through, we're like peeling another layer off, and we're getting deeper, and we're going to the core. So as we move from the outside inwards, we can get more specific about our analysis. So think of the outer thick wheel as the base. That's where we're starting from. That's our core determination of personality. So you can see one half of this wheel is primarily the thinking analytical. This half here is the feeling emotional, and they form the sort of the hub, or the largest part of the, not the hub, sorry, the outer or the biggest part of the model. Once we've determined the constitution, if it's thinking or emotional, that's like the biggest thing that we have to do. And then you see this little capstone, and down here there's another one. They kind of complete the outer circle, and that's our two effects. So when somebody walks in, we determine, is this a thinking or feeling type? And then we look at whether there's an effect going on there. Is there a driver effect, or is there an empathic effect going on? So let's just break that down slowly. We'll go through the model individually. Let's look at the first tier. So here I've just stripped everything away and just left the two, or the sort of core elements. And this is the foundation of the whole system. We just really need to determine, is somebody feeling emotional, or is it thinking analytical? And you can see I put these arrows in here because fundamentally these energies are moving away from each other. They're kind of like opposites, but you can see that they're connected in the center as well. So what it means is that think of it as a spectrum. You can be fully on the emotional spectrum, or you could be fully on the thinking spectrum. But as you move closer towards the center again, it becomes much more difficult to determine which one you are. You can get cases where it's literally just a gnat's hair in one direction to make it, oh, that's going to be a thinking type, oh, that's going to be an emotional type. And that's why they still have this connection in the middle. And also these two are fundamentally bonded. They balance each other as well, like the two halves on this wheel. They each support each other. So I don't want anyone going away thinking, oh, okay, so I'm an emotional type, I don't think, or I'm a thinking type, I've got no emotions. Of course, that's all there. It's the default system, what's underlying the whole personality. You're either going to be driven more by an emotional impulse or more by the thinking analytical impulse. And that's what we're just determining with this base of the model. And I've just done this circle here to show you that that point is really important, because they do connect on some level. So you're going to get people that it's going to be quite difficult to determine. It's going to take a little bit more sleuthing and detective work. And they probably represent 10 or 15% of the people that you're going to look at. I mean, most of them are going to be fairly okay. You'll get it off the bat, but others might take a little bit more analysis, and there's going to be one or two that you're going to really have to ponder. And, if you're not quite sure if the person in front of you is thinking or feeling, it's a good idea to look at their partner as well. See what sort of partner they've attracted in life, because we always attract our opposite to balance. So, if you can't quite make up your mind that the partner was a thinking analytical, but when you look in their partner's eyes, they're definitely the feeling emotional type, pretty much it's going to be the thinking analytical type. Not always, there's a small caveat to that, but we're just doing generals today, okay? So let's actually look at some eyes now. These are kind of like perfect examples, or I've trawled through a lot of images that I had to try and find really over the top examples. So this would be a real slam dunk. You wouldn't have any problem deciding which was which, hopefully. So the iris on this side of the screen, on my left side, is the emotional feeling type. So you see loads heavily proliferated with lots of lacuna. Yes, there are a few colored spots in there, but look at the overwhelming quality of the eye. It's almost like it's kind of gone bang and it's like exploding and moving outwards. You can feel that kind of release of energy. It's like a big sort of explosion and it feels like it's coming towards you. And you can see lots and lots of lacuna, even the fibres. Notice how the fibres are quite loose on this as well. So we haven't really gone into a whole lot of information about the fibres yet, but remember that I said that they're very straight linear fibres allows the energy to move out of the pupil and dissipate quite quickly. But the more they kind of wriggle or they get gaps or it gets dark, the more the energy is like falling down into the eye or getting convoluted around by all the sort of waviness of the fibres. So that's another call for emotional. The more open the fibres get, the more space there is, the more kind of empty pockets. You know, it's kind of increasing. It's like emotion on top of emotion on top of emotion. But the primary determinant is the lacuna, which we obviously see here. So this is balanced by its opposite, which is a thinking analytical type. Now you can see this one, lots and lots of Sora in this eye. That's big proliferation of Sora everywhere. It's like wherever we look, there's a colored patch. And it looks almost like the energy kind of goes inwards. You get much more of a sense of everything moving in. And look how regular the fiber is in this. It's much, much more, okay, there's waviness in places, but overall it's much more regular. It's much straighter. It's moving in a more linear line. And that is another call for the thinking type. The straighter and more regular the fibers go, the more the thinking analytical increases. Okay, so that's a kind of like I say, these are picture perfect ones. I've kind of trawled through to find really good examples. You won't often see ones exactly like this, but these are pretty good. So let's have a look at some of the indications of each of these two types, and we'll discuss a little bit about how we might look at them and qualities associated with them. So we'll start with the emotional feeling type. Now you're going to notice as we read through most of these, when we get to the thinking category, everything's just going to be basically the opposite. So it's almost like you don't have to read the next slide. You just look at these and know that it's going to be opposite. But let's just go through them because it's quite interesting. So qualities, more extroverted. Now, it doesn't mean just because you're an emotional type, you're going to be highly extroverted. Again, there's always a caveat to this, but remember, we're looking at general qualities. So more extroverted, more outgoing. This is a big one, spontaneous as well. It's like emotions in a paper bag, when you just bang it and it just goes. It's like there's no sort of thinking about it. It's just this big explosion and everything just comes out. So that's a typical sign that it's more of an emotional type. There'll be more spontaneity there. So the life and soul of the party, just giggles at a most inappropriate moment or does something really funny. Lots of imagination as well. Not that thinking types can't be imaginative, but remember we're looking at generals. Lots of imagination because this type there's an element of movement there. It's a bit like the air element. It's always moving and cycling, and there's like ideas coming up and then going again, coming and going. Lots of change. So that gives them lots of creativity, the ability to look at things and get quite creative because the way that the pattern of processing isn't fixed, it's very spontaneous. So anything goes, and that's why they can put lots of things together that might not normally be associated with put them together and come up with something creative. Tend to have a more developed auditory intake. So if you want to get this type's attention, it's best to do it by speaking clearly. It's much more that they're much more attuned to the auditory sense, so very sensitive to what's going on around them auditorily. So it makes a big difference for them. So that's another key as well. You can always see whether people are kind of very sensitive to what you're saying, and it's almost like their eyes aren't really focusing on you, or if it's a thinking type, they're very, very intently watching you, but they may not be listening so much because they're kind of like mentally stimulated. They already know where you're going with the conversation. They're just looking for visual confirmation. So just remember, this is the auditory one. The thinking type is the more visual. So the big life lessons behind this structure, primarily it's just about, if you think about all that spontaneity, there's no planning. So if they can be more, if they can take time to plan stuff and be a bit more clear. And responsible is a big one as well. It tends to be a little bit kind of irresponsible. It's like it's always somebody else's fault. It's never their fault. But if they can be more responsible, act with more certainty. And the big one is practice patience. Patience is a terrible thing for this type, because obviously they just want to explode and go with the moment and just do whatever they need to do in that moment. But if they can start practicing all those qualities, essentially importing the other type into their structure, they start to balance, because ultimately you need these two qualities together. And they are, thinking types have emotions and emotional types can think. So we had those qualities already there, but when we integrate them along with our structure, we become much more balanced. So, if you're just a wild emotional type who's just being blown along with the wind, it can be very creative, it can be very spontaneous, and can be very funny, but nothing really much gets done. It's almost like it's just walking through the park and laughing. There's never any kind of thought about, hey, let's turn this park into like something really amazing, and because they're just living in the moment. So by integrating those other qualities like the clarity, responsibility, the patience, they begin to really focus their creative energy, and they can be much, much more productive. And it's a kind of a vicious circle. Once they get stuck into that way of thinking, they just get more and more refined, more and more creative. And then you begin to sort of rise above your pre-programming. You can actually look down on yourself and see how you're reacting to it emotionally. You can start be using the thinker in you to sort of analyze your emotions. It's quite good. Okay, so the big fear of this type is basically being abandoned, feeling alone, not wanted, rejected. If you think about it, all those pockets in the eyes, they're all like emptiness, loss. So a lot of grief, sadness, emptiness, fear of getting left behind. And sometimes the opposite reaction to that, if they feel that they're being left behind, they feel that nobody wants to involve them, or they're being pushed out of the group, they just go into this kind of blaming, angry, sad, and depressed state, which is a sort of a way that they're counteracting all those feelings of abandonment and loss. So you can see, again, even within these individual types, how these, they're all kind of playing off each other, all these qualities. And finally, when they get that sense of balance, when they learn to incorporate the thinking side of them within their emotional side, it brings them a lot of peace. They just feel much more at peace with everything, much more in harmony. Everything's, it's like every day can be faced now, and it's like it's not just uncontrollable all over the place. There is some pattern, or there is some systematized way that they can move forward, and they can start integrating all this creative energy. Now, there is a crossover, obviously, on health as well. We're not just looking at emotions, because you can't really separate the body from emotions anyway, and they all kind of re-infer to one another. You can use them as reference to each other anyway. So there is a lot more, but I'll just say, basically, like in terms of structural weaknesses, if you think about like the hollow organs, you remember this thing about the open spaces, Lacuna. So the hollow organs, the hollow portions of the bodies, connective tissue, what's holding us all together, like that wanted to be together, being held together and stuff like that. Cavities and spaces, or points of articulation where we're moving a lot, because remember, this type likes to move and change. So they tend to be more prone to sort of inflammation, because it's, arising around those points where they're all kind of levering and moving and changing and that sort of thing. So you can apply, there is a physical side to this as well. But obviously we already have physical iridology, but there are physical traits which naturally aligned to a lot of the iridology modeling of the iris as well. I mean, I'm not quite sure how much that fits in with the blue type, but certainly with the emotional type. Okay, let's have a look at its counterpart, the thinking analytical. So again, like I said, it tends to be mostly opposite qualities. So this one, much more introverted. The energy tends to go much more in. It's more analytical, more detail orientated, very verbally expressive. So studying, understanding it, and then quickly converting that and structuring it into words, and then being very precise and quick with their words. The love precision, lots of organization, clarity, more forward planning. It's like already kind of thinking three steps ahead, which is exactly what the emotional type doesn't do. It's like just plodding along one step at a time, not a care in the world. Whereas this type's really trying to map it out. How can I maximize or get the best out of this? They tend to have a highly developed visual intake, but are vocally expressive. So that's another key for determining the type. So when somebody walks into your office and you're trying to sort of determine whether this is emotional or thinking, you can tell quite often by the eyes. So the eyes seem quite sharp. Are they kind of taking everything in? Is there an intensity, a focus there? They're asking lots of poignant questions. If you said the wrong thing, do they correct you quickly? These are all kind of more traits associated with the thinking type. So not surprisingly, their life lessons are completely their opposite, which is the emotional type. So by integrating more spontaneity, more openness, more allowing and more flowing into their life, things move along much better, because the problem is it can go too much the other way. It can get too analytical. You can actually get to the point where you're achieving nothing. You're just overly analyzing one tiny speck, it's going into the minutiae of things that don't really need to be looked at. And you can get lost in or weighted down in all that analysis. So becoming more spontaneous, allowing the mind to let go. Like, you don't have to analyze this. You can back off and you can relax. It's not, we don't have to do this now. We can do it another time. And just integrating that into them really kind of frees up their mind to focus on things that they should be focusing on, not just looking at everything and trying to analyze everything. So the main fears of this type tend to be more criticism or being judged. So, if you kind of correct them or try to judge them or make them wrong, that's like a big, as much as the emotional type really hates that abandonment, being left alone, this is more about being criticized and judged, being told that what you're doing is wrong. That really sort of, it's really going to irk them, going to really go against the grain. And when, if that happens, if they find themselves in that position, then they naturally flip into their imbalanced state, which is to become even more controlling, even more opinionated, very critical, and interrupting all the time is a big one. So they won't even let you criticize them again. They'll just keep interrupting you with something that they've just found that you did wrong, and they'll let you know about that as well. So you're not even getting a chance to criticize them because they've become so interruptive. Remember, these are just the, this is just the main signifiers for these types. So the gifts of this type, if they find their calmness, if they can just be alert but not be over the top analysis, when they can use that inner wisdom, they just get this kind of stillness inside. It's like they can feel content with the knowledge that they can analyze, and they can they can apply their sharp minds to anything they want when they want, but it doesn't become overwhelming. It's not like a constant chatter in the background, like a mental chatter that's just going on and on in their heads all the time. And also, it allows them to get creative as well, because it gives them space. Remember, like I said, the Sora absorb all that life force. It allows that to dissipate and animate other things that are around it in the eye, and it allows them to, to get the best from that quality of themselves. Okay, so let's just have a look at some photographic samples onto some real world irises here. So, I'm not expecting anyone to just say, oh, that's this, that's, well, actually, I've written what it is anyway, so you can see. But just to give you this is how we would approach this eye. If we look at it, okay, so we know we can see it's a brown eye, but I can see there are lots and lots of lacuna in here. Basically, everywhere I look, there's a lot. I mean, a lot of them inside this, inside the A&W or the collarette. I think that's the popular one now, isn't it? Collarettes. Yeah. So inside the collarette, you tend to get more of these pockets anyway, but we're more interested in sort of outside the collarette. But I can see there's plenty of lacuna in here. Yeah, I've got one Sora here, but it's clearly an emotional type, and there are quite a few lacuna in there as well. So that wouldn't be too difficult to determine what type I was looking at there. Okay, let's have a look at another one. So here we go, thinking analytical. Lots and lots of Sora. I mean, yes, there are a few lacuna in there, but I mean, you can see it's overwhelmingly Sora. So, there's pretty much no question there. Again, you can see you always get more pockets on the inside of the collarette, but here's a lacuna here, but yeah, there's plenty of Sora in there. Again, wouldn't be particularly difficult to determine which polarity this person was on. Here's a very easy one, emotional feeling type, lots and lots of pockets all over the place. See that sort of looseness of fibre? It's almost like there's loads and loads of there's so much going on in this eye. There's just so many pockets and so much emotion, and it's just kind of like a big daisy, isn't it? When you look at it, it's like petals everywhere, just leaking energy all over the place. And here's another one. This is the thinking type again. So again, we've got that first thing. It's funny, when I first look at it, what I'm actually looking at first of all is the density of the fiber. I can see it's very compacted. Then I start to look for individual lacuna and Sora. So I can see there's a big Sora there, little tiny one there, one here, one there. Yeah, there's a few lacuna in there, but there's more Sora than there are lacuna. And generally, because of their intensity and their collapsed nature and the way that they pull things in around them, we often weight the scale slightly in favor of Sora. So if we've got equal amounts of Sora and lacuna, we would still probably go thinking, because we just weight the Sora slightly more because of their intensity. They tend to overwhelm lacuna. Again, that's just a little bit of a kind of advanced info there, but it's generally down to experience. You'll just know what to look for confirmation marks, you know. So probably one question you're probably going through your minds is like, well, what do I do if I get very dark colored eyes? And I've got some examples of them here. Generally, as the pigment increases on the surface, it does get more difficult to detect structure. And of course, those of us that have got digital cameras, that's a bit of a godsend really, because it allows us to, through a little bit of photo tinkering, you can quite often you can burn out the color with different softwares, and it allows you to see structure. You are going to get one or two which are literally just so dense, you're just looking at a brown disk. I've seen one or two like that. Now, when we get to that situation, there are other ways that we go on to what we call biomarkers. There are certain things on the body that we can use, like the shape of the face, the way that the head is tilted. You can do like relationships to their parents. You could, of course, look at their partner's eyes. There are other ways to determine, but it's not or never going to be as accurate as actually seeing an iris, you know, like this, to be absolutely sure. So it does get more difficult, but those eyes probably, I don't see so many of those in an average class of students. And I teach kind of Ayurvedic students from all over the world. And you know, when I do their diagnostic class, you know, you might get one person out of 20 that's got really, really dark eyes, but even the dark brown eyes with a good photography, there's enough there. What I have noticed is that you'll tend to get much less structure. So you might not get so many lacuna and not so many Sora. But what we say in the behavioral model is that when you get an iris like this, clearly an emotional type, but you're not going to be starting to interpret every iris position. And we have our own behavioral iris map as well. So we have all that, just like we use all the physical correspondences with the physical iris map, we have a behavioral iris map. So each one of these is in a specific position, but it's almost like you don't even need to start looking at all those positions, because what's happened is there's just so much charge that's coming out and being captured and kind of whirlpooling in these emotional pockets. You only really need to get down the constitution. You could pick out one that interests you and talk about it. But, you know, really, what's this person going to want from you? Really, they're going to want your attention. It's an emotional type. They're going to want to be talked about. So you could talk about anything and you'll kind of capture them. And you can see by this structure that, you know, that's how their communication is going to be. If you're going to give them a remedy or you're going to work with them, it can't be complex, because there's so much going on with this structure. You've got to keep it really simple. The most important thing I would say to somebody like this is that you need to see me regularly, or we need to talk regularly, or we need to check in regularly, because they want lots of communication and to feel that they're being seen and dealt with. So that's a big one. Whereas, you know, if you get somebody with more this kind of constitution, the more thinking type, they're going to want reams and reams, great big lists of long things to do, you know, really highly complex like dietary programs to follow. On Wednesday, do this, and a Friday, do that. On a Saturday, it's got, you know, they'll love it. The more detailed, the better. And they'll be at home after they've spoken to you on the internet, looking up everything you said, seeing, you know, so they can cross-reference it against something else. So there's all that dynamic going on. So it just gives you a way of kind of building up a sense of who you're talking to and developing some sort of a treatment program for them, or even just how you're going to communicate with them and how you're going to work with them. Okay, so how are we doing? I think we've got time to this next bit. So let's just look at the effects. So that you can see we moved on to the next graphic. So what I've done is I've put these little caps back in top and bottom. So whereas the first two are kind of the diametrically opposed or outward moving energies, we have an upward moving and we have a downward moving effect. So a driver isn't a type, it's not a constitution, and an empathic isn't a constitution. They're literally effects, and they're big effects. They dynamically modify a lot how we deal with that person. So what we're looking for here is we're just looking to identify, what does it mean to have a driver effect? What does it mean to have an empathic effect in an iris? So let's look at these. Okay. So if we think back to those first slides when I showed you the different types of structuring, the driver effect is just what we call just a combination. It just means if we've got Sora and we've got Lacuna in the same iris, and that automatically gives us the driver effect. We can have 100 Lacuna and one driver, one Sora, or we can have 100 Sora and one Lacuna. It's still a driver effect. It just adds charge. But just think about it like that sliding scale. The more that they balance each other, so if we have roughly the same amount of emotional pockets as we do the Soric spots, we get the full driver effect. It'll be really super explosive because you've got lots of things that are acting like a catalyst on each other. When you put those two together, they explode. So you can see in this iris here, it's got more Sora than it's got Lacuna, but there are a good, that one definitely is pretty good. There's a fairly good one here, a couple of small ones here. It's enough. And you can see that this one really has that kind of explosive like charge to it. It's already, it's gone off. It's like a keg of dynamite that's gone off. So there's going to be a lot of action here. But when we look at the counterpart to that, the empathic effect, it's kind of again, as we emotional and thinking, these two are opposites as well. So everything that this one is, this one isn't. This is very, very grounded. It's very, very body centered. It's very practical. It's very linear. It's very calm and metered. Whereas this one's just kind of like crazy, off the track, as mad as you like. It doesn't matter. You bring it on. It can be as strange as you like. The more weird it is, the better. This one's like, no, don't like anything like that. I want it very regimented. I want it give it to me gently, give it to me slowly, give it to me constructive. And, and it's got to have a happy ending. It's that kind of thing. So they're opposites again. They're not constitutional types, but they're opposites. And these effects have a big kind of effect on, that's what they call effects. They have a big effect on the person. So if we're an emotional person, but we have a driver effect going on, it means all those emotions are being stirred up, revved up, made even more explosive and pushed upwards. So we become even more grounded, even more emotionally prone to outbursts. It's even more destabilizing. But if we're an emotional type and we have a lot of this empathic fiber, it's going to ground a lot of that emotion. It's going to bring it back down to earth. It's going to desensitize it. It's going to be to calm it right down. And it's a bit like think about those pockets of explosions. Rather than allowing those pockets to explode, the empathic effect is draining all the pressure out of those lacuna. It's grounding it or earthing it, so it just can't get so exploded. They're still an emotional type, but with all that empathic fiber in there, it's going to help ground that out. So let's just look at some of the qualities of these in a bit more detail. So like the first two were outwards and opposing, these two are upwards and downwards. So this quality is upward in direction, enthusiastic, highly motivating, very, very changeable, and very dynamic. Just so you know that if you see either of the constitutions, but it has a driver effect, that this person's feet aren't going to touch the ground. They're going to be on the go all the time, like a train through a wall. When they become imbalanced, it can get very reckless because, they're so head on, just so go for it. They can actually start even damaging themselves, like literally running into walls, having accidents. great bridge burners as well. You know, they're not really worried about, so they'll upset the apple cart because it's only what they want to achieve in that moment, and you know, that's what they want to do now. They're not thinking of consequences. So they can come over as being more selfish, more callous. You know, we think, oh, that person's so selfish. You know, they're only thinking of themselves. But it's because they've got that explosive quality, and it's just expressing itself instantaneously. It's like erupted, it's out, and it's happening. There's no thought of tomorrow. It's all now. So their life lesson is much more about cooperation and delegation, you know, which is the opposite, which is going to be the empathic type. This type really needs to do like an empathic type does. It needs to ground, it needs to be able to cooperate, it needs to say, okay, I know I'm driven, I know I've got lots of things, but I can achieve twice as much if I get others involved. So it can even use its, you know, there's even like a sort of cunning quality there, because it would think, so I can do 3 times the jobs that I want to do, takes a little bit of pressure off me, and it leaves me a little bit of free time to do extra that I can do on top. So if it can just learn that kind of cooperation and delegation and bringing other people into the fold and integrating them into what they want to do, they're going to be much more balanced, because it literally is going to take some of the crazy, you know, with all these sort of grounded types around them, it's going to help sort of ground them out a little bit and at least regulate their, you know, their sort of wild fluctuations. So the gifts of this type are extremely cutting edge, very kind of like amazing ideas that just come from nowhere, you know, like pop straight in their head, and then they suddenly thought of a new type of phone or a new type of car or something like that. Great manifestors. They're fantastic for breaking deadlocks. You can have a room of empathic types that are all sitting around not wanting to upset anyone, and this one can walk in and just say, that's what needs to happen, do it now, and suddenly the deadlock's broken and everybody can move. Just give me 1 second. So, you know, they're great at breaking the impasse with creative thinking. They can literally come in and say, you know, do you realize this room's on fire? And they're all standing around having a talk about it. This one will just grab the fire extinguisher and point it at the flames and put the fire out. It's action. It's like, let's do it now. Let's get moving. Right. So let's look at the opposite type, the empathic effect. So just like the thinking and the emotional type, it's all the opposite stuff. So downward in direction, much more caring, supportive, grounding, very regular, practical, dependable. That's a big one, dependable. You can always rely on these people to, these are like the sort of the glue that holds everybody together. You know, these are like the very, very dependable types. Easily overwhelmed, because it's kind of, they don't have that, they're not pattern breakers. So it can get a bit too much if you get too many people, or if there's like a sort of too much static, if nothing's changing and nothing's moving, they can get a little bit stressed by that. So that's why the opposite effect balances and helps it. It helps to move this one on, but this one helps to ground the driver effect. So again, they kind of work together. They can be very self-conscious as well, because all these neurogenic fibers, all this tight, compact fiber together, they're very sort of tactile, people-orientated, touchy-feely. Do you know what I mean? It's all to do with like connection, and very connected to people around them. They don't even have to be that close. They just feel like there's a sort of a community energy to it. It's like all those regimented fibers all boxed in really tightly. They just learn to live and work and function in very sort of cramped conditions. So they have that sort of feeling of connectedness. The life lesson of this type is much more learning to lead than initiate, and initiate basically, because that's the thing that they're lacking. So when they can take a bit more control, it's going to be hard for them to do. They're kind of introducing their opposite. They're becoming more like a driver. But if they can learn to initiate stuff, then again, it's going to move them on. It's going to allow that energy to flow, and they're going to be able to do a lot more. They won't get stuck so much. And the biggest one for them is basically creating harmony through conflict. You know, it's almost like they need to be able to say no to people. Otherwise, there's a tendency that they'll just lose their boundaries. It's almost like, you know, too many people around them sort of dictating what they should be doing, not allowing them to do what they think they want to do. And because they're so accommodating and people friendly. So, you know, being able to say no and stand on their ground and hold their space is going to be really, really important. And when they get all those qualities, they're much more calming. It brings a sense of belonging. They get much more inspirational, and they get they've got a strong interest in the group anyway, but they get this real sense of group identity, like we're all working together. You know, we can achieve so much more as a group. So let's just look at a quick a few examples of those. So again, some real world examples. So you can see we've got Sora and we've got Lacuna together in this iris. And we have a driver because we only have to have the presence of one good Lacuna and Sora, and we've got the driver effect. What we could say about this one was that there are, I don't know this, remember we kind of don't think too much about the ones on the inside of the collarette, but that's kind of on the inside. There's one good one on the outside there. There's a little bit of rarefaction here and there. Let's just say one. So we can say that although there's a driver effect there, it's not going to be an outrageous driver effect. It's going to be there, and then we can look at that specific position and see what that was about. But overall, it's going to be, a driver will be there, would it be somewhat muted? And another thing, if you notice, there's quite a high level of compactness to those fibres, which, remember I said, the more compact the iris fibres, the more it's moving towards the thinking side as well. So we already know this is a thinking type because there are way more Sora than Lacuna. So as I get on, my voice starts to get a bit croaky. But there's a good level of neurogenic fiber there. Remember, the neurogenic is we can't have a driver and an empathic together. It has to be one or the other. And we clearly got Sora and we've clearly got a Lacuna. So we would definitely go with a driver in this. But we would note that there's a good quality to the empathic fiber. So again, what happens is when you get the two, when you get a driver with Sora and Lacuna together and you get good neurogenic fiber, the neurogenic would just drain some of the driver effect. It's still a driver, but with this strong neurogenic quality to the eye, it would drain some of that driver quality out of the eye. So it would be a subdued driver. And probably, we'd go into more specific positions to see what they were being more driven or what was more up for them in their life. But yeah, I mean, that's what I would say looking at this one. It's the driver's there, but it's being muted quite a lot. Let's have a look at this one. So this is one of those instances where we've got those brown eyes. These are actually quite dark when you see them. You wouldn't be able to see this much detail. So using some photo software, I've been able to bring up or show all of this structure, which is really, 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 really handy. Lots and lots of Lacuna. One, maybe two Sora in there. So we know it's an emotional type. We know that it's got driver energy. They're quite dark Sora. So I'm going to do a little bit of advanced stuff here. The darker the Sora, their nature changes. We call them deactivated. It doesn't mean to say that then we don't consider them, but it's just that their thinking quality gets reduced a lot. A lot of that mental focus and sort of edginess goes. So they become markers for other things. We look at them we use it much more when we look at timelines in the eye to see this is usually something that's not worked for them. Something's not been corrected either in lifestyle or diet. So what's happened is it's produced this dark Sora and it becomes like a flag. It's something that we kind of zero in on, and we know that it's like an unresolved issue, if you like. They become deactivated. They're like sort of grumpy Sora. They sort of sit there and just be kind of really grumpy and cause problems. So we look at those in a slightly different way. So with this type here, I would say, yes, it's definitely a driver, but the fact that it's a dark Sora and there's only really one, of course it's a driver, but I would treat this one more as just a purely emotional rather than in fact, if you look at it, the fibers are quite dense as well. There's quite a lot of empathic quality to this eye as well. So, and that again would drain any residual driver quality that Sora was giving, would really drain it out. So probably not too much driver at all. This is going to be far more about emotional, just all the regular kind of emotional stuff. So I wouldn't factor in the driver so much with this iris. How are we doing for time? We kind of reached our hour. It goes quick, doesn't it? I just sort of started to get warmed up and then the hours. I don't know. We're kind of, I don't think I want to go anymore because we're going to just get into other stuff. Let me just summarize at this point by saying we've just scratched the surface. There's a lot to this. We can look at lots and lots of things in the iris, just like classical or physical iridology. We're looking at lots of other things. We'll factor in these rings. We have a series of different rings that we'll look at. The quality of the A and W or collarette is highly important. That's a big one for us as well. That enables us to determine like introversion, extroversion, spontaneity, or groundedness. There's all different qualities we can look at from there. We also look at, obviously, left and right iris are two dynamics that are playing off each other. That's a big part. We can quarter the eye, and we can look at individual quarters and see if there's a predominance of structure in any one of those quarters. We can divide the eye into 12, and that gives us a subset of kind of organs. I know it sounds a bit weird, but we subdivide the eye into 12, and each one of those sectors will then relate to a body system or organ, and then it's connected to a whole set of other behavioral qualities as well. So that's like an overlay we can do. And then you've got timelines in the iris. You've got like a 60-year timeline. There's a 6-year timeline. There's a 9-month timeline for the child in utero and stuff. So there's lots and lots you can look at. And then on top of all that, we would add iris color, which is really important, just for determining kind of certain overviews and traits. And again, that's where we bring in more of the physical model over the top, just to look at organs and systems. And then finally, we've got iris positions. There's about 30 iris positions in the eye that relate to specific things. And again, they're really kind of more for building rapport, or if you want to be more specific, if you wanted to say exactly where that Sora was here. So this area, for instance, is sort of very much to do with like self-esteem, creativity area of the eye as well. So, the fact that was in there, we could talk about that. And we know that this is the left iris, and it's to do with the mother. So this could be coming from the mother's lineage. And so there's lots of things you can go into. It's quite a detailed system. And overall, the most important thing is it's fun. It's great to look and see what's going on in your own iris, look at your family, look at those traits that are getting passed along, what's coming up for people. Are they developing Sora? Are they kind of got all these wonderful lacunas? Is there anything, as the collarette doing anything strange? And it's just really great. It's a nice counterbalance. I love the physical. I started with a physical model, and it's great. But when I discovered the behavioral side, it was like I used to look at my eye with the physical model and get quite depressed, because you see all those things and you think, oh no, I've got this, I've got that. But the way we look at everything behaviorally is that everything there is to help you. There's nothing, you have exactly what you need, and nothing should be taken away. It's all doing a job. It's all helping you move to something that you need to discover about yourself and learn about yourself. So everything's positive. There are negative qualities and positive qualities for everything, but overall, all of it is there for a positive reason. It can do great things. They are, every iris is unique, and every one of us is unique. And it's those individual qualities in the iris that make us stand out and make us who we are, what we are. And once you know what those positions and traits are, you could perhaps develop those. You can see that you've got all these kind of latent tendencies to be able to do these things. By identifying them behaviorally, it makes it much more exciting, what your own potential is. So it's a great tool for rapport, basically. It's a great tool for understanding and stuff like that. So I think we'll kind of end it there. If we go back to, shall I pass back to you, Brenda? I can't remember how to do this.
Okay,
now.
Hold on just a second. We have some questions about a couple of your slides.
Yeah. Should we do that now, or shall I pass it back to you first?
Well, if you pass it back to me, we won't be able to do the slides.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So let me.
Okay. Go for it.
You want me to read a couple of these things here for you?
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Terry says, "Can you show structural eye slide on second one you skipped over?"
Structural slide. Which one was that?
Yeah. Let's see. I think she put
the base constitutions.
Thinking analytical structural slide is the one you skipped over. Can you please show it? Thinking analytical structural slide.
That one. Sorry. Yes, I was going to say, as much as the Lacuna type is like all the hollow organs, this is like the solid organs, tissue density. It's much more about like digestion, assimilation. If you think about it, that's like how we analyze, isn't it? We digest something, we assimilate it, and then it becomes our own, like we analyze. So yeah, it tends to be much more the digestive system of the body. It goes into much more detail than that, but just generally that's how we're looking at the organs and systems that are governed more by this type. So it doesn't mean to say that let's say, let's look at an emotional type and say, okay, hollow spacer. So you could say like arthritis or something like that, something to do with the bones and the joints. It doesn't mean to say this type can't get that because it's not ruling over those parts of the bodies. You would just find that the cause or the symptom behind that was obviously inspired by whatever this particular structure was ruling over. So that's what it would become a little bit more. You'd have to rely on your whatever system you're using to treat people. I mean, I know I just tend to think of these things ayurvedically. So obviously arthritic conditions are usually caused by undigested food matter. So, that makes a lot of sense to me. But, it depends what system you're using to look at that. But just generally, those are the things that it's holding sway over.
Do you have, let's see, Mike says, can you show the behavioral iridology map and tell a bit on how it relates with the physical iridology?
Yeah. I wonder if I actually, do you know what? I don't think I've got it in this presentation. It would be hassle for me to, can I do that? I mean, it'll be, but I don't want to do it. I don't want to close any screens because it'll go.
Yeah, okay. So
I'll just end up shutting the whole thing.
Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, just know that it's obviously, I haven't even got the physical map in here I can show you, but it's the same principle. You're just basically dividing, you're dividing it up. They're all unequal sizes. They're not just like the physical mapping. It's whatever, like say, for instance, the nurturing position, which is over the lung area, is rather large, like the liver area, the anger area is quite big, spleen area is quite big. It's just like the physical map. And then we would have interpretations over each one of those. And then you can overlay it again on top of the physical. And quite often you can see there's a match between the organs and those areas anyway. I mean, that's obviously how the system was developed. We already talk about, don't we, like pancreatic stuff is like jealousy, and the lung is related to like grief and sadness. And so you can see that there's an underlying energetic that connects both maps. They don't fit exactly, but they're close. So you can, I've actually got a physical map I've drawn of my own, which I've tried to sort of map very carefully over the top of the behavioral one. So those two obviously work very well together because I've been using the behavioral to construct both and try and form, some sort of, they're color coded so you can see how things fit together. This is what I was hoping to put over in the book eventually. So it makes it easier for people to transition between the physical and the behavioral model.
Okay, let's see. And we have just some general questions here. Let's see. Royzen says, so enjoyable, would love more, please. Do you have a slide that shows your contact information so all these people can contact you?
Yeah, I think I did that at the end. There we go. So that's all the blurb. So basically you've got my website, which is relatively new. So there's not a whole lot on there. It just kind of gives you an idea, but you can contact me. There's a contact form on there, or you can just email me directly. Don't forget, if you're in the States, put the U in. Otherwise, it ends up going to my friend, Mr. Burgess, because he's actually USA Behavioral Iridology, so without the U. So I'm sure he'd be more than happy to get your mails too. But if you want to send them to me, make sure you put the U in. And then I've got this, I didn't set this Facebook up. My friend did it. He's a bit of a Facebook aficionado, so I kind of fiddle around on it. I don't even know what I'm doing on it half the time, but it seems to work. So you can join this, or just you have to fill out a couple of questions to ask to join. It's free. I try and post as much as I can on there. Obviously, I don't have huge amounts of time to just sit on it all day and post, but if I've got anything of interest, or I suddenly go into a flurry, you'll get like 3 in one day and then you won't get anything for a month. So if you're kind of okay with that, and you feel free to post pictures in there and we can kind of discuss them. And I just put anything I think is relevant in there. So that's the Facebook group. If you don't want to write all that down now, just search on Facebook for Behavioral Iridology and you'll find the forum, and then just ask to join and, pile on in. And if you've got stuff you want to contribute, it's kind of a small group at the moment. So people are a bit tentative about asking questions. Everyone's kind of a bit worried about asking the wrong question or something. But the best thing is, the way I learned this was just ask loads of silly questions. And just keep at it and you'll get it. Don't feel frightened to just plow on in and just make assumptions, because that's the way you learn. If you say, I think this is a thinking type, and then we can look at it and discuss it. And then if I think it's an emotional type, I'll say it and I'll give my reasons for it. And then you can think, oh, now I've got it. That's how you learn. So don't be frightened to post stuff on there and ask questions. I'm going to do a course at the end of this month. So that's the flyer for the course. So if anybody's interested to do that, I'm going to start at the end of the month. So it'll be 1 hour every week, 7 till 8 p.m. So very simple, like introductory, really laid back. You just turn up. And then we'll just go through it slowly. You can bring your own pictures in. And obviously it's not a 1 hour intimate discussing about your life and history. It's a course to learn the system, but obviously everybody wants to know about their own iris. So it's great to have a good copy of your iris to hand, and you can be translating that information as we kind of go through the information. So again, this is all on my website. If you go to courses page, it's all on there and you can look at it. So I think that's kind of it, really. I mean,
no, there's a few other things. Does your book go into the more complex types? Please post a link to your book. Do you have a link?
Yeah, I should have said that because what happened there was that you asked me for some bio, and of course I just copied it out of my book, but the book isn't actually finished yet. I'm still fiddling with it. It would have been done 2 years ago, but the COVID thing happened, and then it just all kind of went crazy here. So it will be done as soon as I can do it. It is coming, but it's not available at the moment. But yes, it's quite detailed. So I've talked about every aspect of it. And I first of all discuss the physical side, and then I look at the behavioral side, and then you can see how they link together, because I don't think that's been done by anyone yet. So that was the purpose of the book, so people can use both. But just be aware, I know the physical side, but I'm not an expert at it. So I've just picked the physical things that are like the most important things to know, not the sort of tiny minutia detail again, but the stuff that you probably most want to know. And then I've looked at the behavioral and physical side by side and give some discussion about why I think they're connected and how I think they're connected.
So Carolyn says, thanks for all this, Andrew. A question is a central heterochromia a large Sora?
No, that's a great question. Obviously, in the behavioral model, if we can see it, we interpret it, and it has some bearing. Things where you get those large blankets of pigment in the eye, it can either be something quite interesting or it could be something really vague. You have to look at the quality of it. Is it opaque? Is it translucent? Where it is? If it's just one eye, like one blue, one brown eye, then that's a whole different ball game. But no, we don't really treat it as such. And also anything to do inside the A and W or collarette becomes difficult, because we kind of call that the area of unconsciousness. It's basically ancestral stuff. If you think about the life force animates, it comes through the eye, it energizes all this ancestral area. This is why it's so complex, and they're like so much structure, because that's all kind of like ancestral influences, like fingers reaching out of the pupil and sort of like gripping around. And the thing that stops them is the collarette, and that's the sort of the first wall. That's the last thing that sort of develops in the iris, and that's like your individuality separating from your ancestors. So that's your wall. So if that wall gets broken, obviously there's lots of stuff that can flow through, and you can start having some strong influences from previous generations kind of starting to take over the picture, if you like. Or if you've got those very well-defined collarettes, very raised, ropey, white, thick, that can almost be like they've really established a strong sense of identity, like they've separated from their ancestors, and this is me, this is my space. So we can learn so much just by looking at the shape of those collarettes. It's incredible. That's like a whole book in itself. And you'll see in the map when you look at the there it is. You can see it actually gets its own circle, and it's near the, this is not particularly structured in a way. It's to do with getting more specific as we go down. So like as I said at the beginning, you decide you've got thinking, you've got emotional, then you've got driver effects going on, then you've got these social types. We didn't even talk about those, but where you get a mix of empathic and constitution. Then we've got the modifiers. So we look at the iris color, how that modifies the personality. The expression ring, which is the collarette, that's a big player. the other types of iris ring, which have a big effect on the iris as well. And then finally, we get very specific with the individual positions. So, as we're drilling down, we're getting more specific. It's almost like, the broadest level, it's like a sort of cannon, isn't it? Just bang, and we've hit the target. But once we get down to the individual iris positions, we're sort of talking about snipers, hitting an individual spot. It becomes much more focused.
Okay. And one more question. Desiree says, so a thinking empathic type is more yin and an emotional driver more yang?
I don't get to use that. I was quite keen because obviously in some of the older models, like if you go into like the RAID system, they use a lot of those Chinese terms. The problem is I did actually, a good friend of mine is a sort of a Chinese expert. He's amazing. And when I started talking about what I thought was yin and yang, he was just laughing at me. He said, who told you that? It's like, so he was trying to explain to me. So I try not to use those. I try not to use those terms, but you could say very broadly that the thinking type is more to do with the right eye, it's more to do with structure, and it's more to do with father. The emotional type is more to do with the mother eye, it's more to do with breaking up structure, it's more to do, so I guess that would be more of a yin. But you remember what I said about these types are always seek balance. So the emotional type will naturally try to ground itself by moving towards the father eye to get that energy, that stability, and that grounding quality. Whereas to release itself from its bondage of sort of mental bondage, the thinking type will try to move to the mother eye and release, So I'm just very cautious about using sort of yin and yang, and there is some elemental crossover between these things, but it's so specific to the individual. You're dealing with a highly complex organism where we've got lots of things going on and we've got lots of influences. I mean, you can have emotional types who've got way more structure in their father eye. So it's almost like they've already arrived where they need to be, and they're really working with that. Whereas you get predominantly most of the Lacuna tend to be in the mother's eye, and vice versa for the Sora. You'll tend to find more of the Sora will be in the father's eye, and so on. So, but you can get people that have all the Sora in the left eye. So it's really specific. I mean, you really have to merit it on the individual case. You can't sort of use those. I just avoid those blanket terms, if that makes sense.
Okay, and then we have great presentation. It makes me thirst to just know more. Iridology is an underappreciated science-based art, and I'm grateful to have this type of exposure to continue learning. So can you tell us a little bit about, you've got a class coming up, what how they sign up for it, how much it costs, those kinds of things?
Okay, so it's we'll start 30th is the last Wednesday of this month. It'll be 1 hour, be a Zoom meeting. I mean, it'll go over a bit, be like 15-20 minutes over, so there's always questions at the end. So like a 1 hour class, and it's just going through the system very carefully, very slowly, so just people really get it. What I want everyone to be able to walk away at the end of it is just to be able to identify all this stuff, to at least categorize an eye, and then know what they're looking at and how they might interpret it. Now, obviously, like any of these systems, you can learn the principles of Ayurveda in 20 minutes, but it can take you 90 years to be able to really fully use it. And this is the same. So I'm giving you the tools, and then it's up to you to go away and practice and understand it. But you're already mostly iridologists anyway, and you're looking in eyes all the time. So what I would say is, once you've got the basic tools, is you'd be looking at the physical model, but just try and think about it in the behavioral model, how that might fit that same person. And you'll start dropping those things in, and you'll find, a good friend of mine uses the two systems together, and she says it's amazing the rapport you build up, because people really feel you've connected with them. So that's a great quality. So yeah, so basically it'll be an introductory course, quite simple, 5 hours. So we've got 5 individual courses. Cost is £200 English. And then there's a PayPal button on my website. So if you just log on, pay, and then I'll send you all the blurb, there'll be notes, not a huge amount. Don't expect reams and reams of it. I mean, there'll be like PDFs and maybe some PowerPoint stuff. I'll just give you what I think you need that covers the lesson we've just done. And then I'll record the sessions and upload the videos, and then you get access to those for pretty much as long as you want. So if you miss a session, you can always go back and watch the video. Obviously better to be there live, isn't it? To experience the being in the the live conversation. I think that's it really. Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, isn't it? You can just there's so many things and so many things you can use it for. It's just yeah, I mean, and you kind of play it by the people that are doing it as well. People have different learning speeds, so it depends on how we do and what we do. I've structured it just to go through all these basic things. Like everything you see here will do the emotional thinking types, the effects and the modifiers. I mean, there's quite a lot there.
Okay. All right. So if you want to turn back the host back over to me here.
Right, this is the bit where I mess it all up. Let's have a look.
Oh, that's all right. Just go to participants.
Yeah. Hang on, I have to go stop share. There we go. More and make host. Look, I did it.
Yay. See, perfect. Look how easy that was.
I never doubted myself for a second.
So a lot of people said thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. Great presentation. Thank you, Brenda, for hosting. You're very welcome for hosting. Let's see, just lots of thank yous. That was excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew, again for being willing to spend this time, for saying yes when I called, contacted you, and sharing your time, sharing your knowledge. And anybody that wants to learn more, you can go to Andrew's website and sign up for his little classes. And anything else you want to add, Andrew?
No, I don't think so. I've sort of reached, I sort of burn out now. This is it. I've reached end of my, I mean, it's quite, you've probably all done talks yourself, but it's quite, is this or that, I want to try and get over as clear as I can. And I've got all these things going on in my head that I'm trying to think about what would be good to tell. So I apologize if I sort of skipped or jumped around a little bit. I try to do it differently every time as well, because some of you have probably seen this 2 or 3 times. So I don't want to get it too boring or just do the same format all the time.
It's not boring. This is my 3rd time, and every time it's great. And the more repetition we get, the better, right? So that's how we learn. And
the most important thing is just have fun with it. It's a lot of fun as well to learn and to see these. I remember the first time I had somebody read my eyes, it was a real kind of revelation. It's a big thing. It's like life-changing, really. You suddenly think, wow, how did that come? And then you start to study it, and then you can see patterns, and even the way things are positioned relative to each other can tell you things. And there's a lot. It's fun. That's the main thing.
It is fun. Yes, really appreciate it. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate all of you for being here. I will send the recording out, so you'll all get the recording and you can watch it on your time. And if you have questions about anything, make sure that you contact Andrew. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here.